Imagine this: you're about to give a presentation, walk into an interview, or meet someone important, and your chest tightens, your breath shortens, your hands sweat. You feel anxiety controlling you. But what if I told you that 90% of this anxiety isn't real, that most of what we fear never actually happens, and learning this single rule can free you from its grip forever? Anxiety is a master of illusions. It paints pictures in your mind of outcomes that almost never happen, and it convinces you they're real. This is what I call the 90% illusion. Studies in psychology suggest that the majority of our worries, as high as 90%, never materialize in real life. That means most of the thoughts that keep us awake at night, most of the scenarios that make our stomach twist, exist only in imagination. They never step into reality. Think of how often you felt nervous about a conversation, an exam, or a job interview, only to realize later that it went smoother than you expected, or that the catastrophe you imagined never appeared. This is the 90% illusion at work. The human brain is wired for survival, not for peace. Thousands of years ago, this wiring kept us safe. If you assumed danger was behind every rustling bush, you'd live longer than the person who ignored the possibility of a predator. Our minds are still trained this way, always imagining threats. The difference is, today the tiger in the grass is not a predator but a boss's opinion, a stranger's judgment, or the possibility of failing in front of others. Our biology hasn't caught up with modern life, so the same mechanism that once saved us now traps us in unnecessary worry. We fear consequences that don't exist. That's why the 90% illusion is so powerful. It comes from an ancient system running on outdated software. Let's test it with a simple example. Think of the last time you had to speak in front of others. Perhaps you imagined forgetting your words, stuttering, or being laughed at. These thoughts circled in your head like vultures before the moment came. But when you finally stood up and spoke, what happened? Chances are, none of those fears came true. Maybe your voice shook at first, but the crowd did not laugh. Maybe you forgot a line, but nobody judged you as harshly as you imagined. You see, the mind builds mountains out of moments. It takes a small challenge and exaggerates it into a disaster. That is the 90% illusion, the distance between what we imagine and what reality actually delivers. This illusion also has a hidden cost. It steals the present. When your mind is busy constructing imaginary disasters, you're not living in the now. You're somewhere else, lost in a movie created by your fears. Picture someone standing at the edge of a swimming pool, afraid to jump in. They imagine the water will be freezing, or that they'll sink. Minutes pass. Their friends are already swimming, laughing, and enjoying themselves, but the anxious one stands frozen, living inside the illusion. The moment is lost. By the time they finally jump, they realize the water isn't as cold as they thought. But the wasted minutes, the joy they missed, those are the real losses. The illusion robbed them of life in the present. Here's the truth. The 90% illusion feels real because the body reacts as if it is. When you imagine failure, your heart races. When you think of embarrassment, your palms sweat. Your body doesn't wait for reality, it responds to imagination. This is why anxiety is so convincing. The physical signals confirm the story in your head, but the cycle can be broken. If you recognize that these reactions are often based on nothing more than illusion, you begin to create space between thought and truth. You see the difference between fear's imagination and reality's evidence. That space is where freedom begins. The lesson is simple but profound. Most of what you fear is nothing but smoke. The mind builds shadows where there is no substance. The moment you start questioning your anxious thoughts, asking, "Is this part of the 90% that will never happen?" you weaken the illusion's grip. Imagine carrying a heavy backpack, thinking it's filled with rocks, only to discover it's stuffed with paper. That's what anxiety often is, a weight that feels crushing, but has no real mass. When you see the illusion for what it is, you can finally set it down, and in that act, anxiety starts to lose its power over you. If 90% of the fears we carry are illusions, what about the other 10%? It's true, sometimes our worries are not imaginary. Sometimes the exam is difficult, the interview doesn't go as planned, or the relationship does end. This is the part of life that anxiety often points to the small percentage where things do go wrong. But here's the paradox: when difficulties actually arrive, they are rarely as devastating as the mind predicted. The storm we imagined was bigger than the rain that fell. The 10% is real, but it is manageable. Consider this: you worry for days about a presentation at work. Your anxiety tells you, I will embarrass myself, everyone will think I'm incompetent, my career will suffer. Then the moment comes, and yes, maybe you forget one small detail, maybe your voice trembles, but instead of the disaster your mind painted, your colleagues nod in understanding or even offer support. The reality is a stumble, not a collapse. The 10% often carries lessons and growth, not the catastrophe anxiety promised. When you finally face the situation, you discover your strength. Reality is kinder than imagination. This pattern reveals an important truth. We underestimate our ability to cope. Anxiety makes us believe, if this happens, I won't survive it. But look back at your life. How many challenges have you faced already? Breakups, failures, disappointments, mistakes, and yet here you are, still standing, still breathing. The fact that you are listening to these words now means you've already survived every difficult moment so far. The 10% that does occur is not proof of your weakness. It is proof of your resilience. You are stronger than the fear wants you to believe. Think of a child learning to ride a bicycle. Before they pedal, they imagine falling and hurting themselves. That's the anxiety, and yes, sometimes they do fall. But when they do, they scrape a knee, not break a leg. They cry for a moment, then get up again. The fear of falling was worse than the fall itself. The same is true in our lives. The idea of failure hurts more than failure itself. Because failure teaches, failure shapes, failure passes. The 10% brings us closer to growth, not further from it. Another way to look at this is through nature. A tree that has never faced wind grows weak, fragile, unable to withstand storms. But a tree that bends with the wind, that has faced seasons of pressure, becomes strong and deeply rooted. The 10% of challenges in life are like the wind. They are not punishments, they are the training that deepens our roots. Without them, we would be untested and fragile. Anxiety tells you that struggle is unbearable, but in truth, it is the very thing that strengthens you. The pain is temporary, the growth is permanent. So when the 10% does arrive, when something you feared actually happens, remember this: it is not the end. It is only a part of your story. The disappointment, the rejection, the failure, they are chapters, not the whole book. And often, they are the chapters that transform you the most. Anxiety exaggerates the weight of the 10%, making it seem like the whole world is collapsing. But once you step into reality, you realize that the weight is something you can carry. It may be heavy for a while, but it never crushes you. The 10% is real, but so is your capacity to endure it. Most people see anxiety as an enemy, something to fight against, something that must be silenced or destroyed. But what if anxiety is not here to harm you, but to teach you? This shift in perspective is powerful. Anxiety is not always a curse, it is often a messenger. It arrives with a signal, Pay attention. It tells you there is something in your life that matters, something that requires awareness, preparation, or courage. If you learn to listen rather than resist, anxiety becomes less of a prison and more of a compass pointing toward growth. Think of the body's alarm system. When you place your hand on a hot stove, pain warns you to pull away. Without pain, you would burn yourself badly. Anxiety works the same way. It alerts you to potential risks or situations where you must be more mindful. For example, a little anxiety before an exam motivates you to study harder. A touch of nervousness before a meeting pushes you to prepare your notes. If you had no anxiety at all, you would drift through life unprepared, careless, even reckless. Anxiety teaches responsibility. It shows you where your attention is needed. But here is where the lesson deepens. Anxiety doesn't only point to external situations, it also reveals what is happening inside of you. Pay attention to what triggers your anxious thoughts. Is it the fear of judgment, the fear of failure, the fear of being abandoned? Anxiety is like a mirror, showing you the parts of yourself that need healing. If speaking in front of others fills you with dread, it may not just be about the audience, it may reveal a deeper wound, perhaps a fear of not being accepted or a belief that you're not enough. The anxiety is the symptom, but the real lesson lies beneath it. A useful way to see this is to imagine anxiety as a teacher in disguise. At first, this teacher looks intimidating, raising its voice, making you uncomfortable. But when you stop running and sit down to listen, you realize the teacher is pointing to lessons you would otherwise miss. That nervous energy before an interview, it is teaching you to value preparation. The fear of failure, it is teaching you humility and resilience. The feeling of being judged, it is teaching you to build inner confidence rather than relying on approval from others. The teacher's methods may be tough, but the lessons shape you in profound ways. Here's a story that illustrates this. A young man once struggled with constant anxiety about his career. Every night, he lay awake, replaying all the ways he might fail at work. Instead of fighting the anxiety, he began to ask it questions. What are you trying to tell me? Slowly, he realized that his anxiety wasn't about work at all. It was about the pressure he placed on himself to prove his worth to others. His teacher anxiety was showing him the real issue was self-acceptance. Once he learned this, his anxiety softened because the lesson had been heard. The fear was not trying to punish him, it was trying to guide him back to himself. This is the essence of treating anxiety as a teacher. When it shows up, you no longer panic or resist. You sit with it, you listen, and you learn. Sometimes the lesson is simple: prepare better, slow down, be present. Sometimes the lesson is deeper: heal this old wound. Stop comparing yourself. Trust in your own strength. Anxiety is a strict teacher, but it never comes without a lesson. And once the lesson is understood, the teacher no longer needs to raise its voice. One of the greatest powers we have is the ability to observe, to step back and watch the mind without being swallowed by it. Most of the suffering caused by anxiety comes from identification, from believing every thought that passes through the head. The moment you believe this fear is real, this disaster is certain, anxiety grips you like a chain. But when you learn to observe, you create space between yourself and your thoughts. In that space, anxiety loses its power. You realize, I am not my thoughts, I am the one who notices them. Imagine sitting by a river, watching leaves float downstream. Each leaf represents a thought. One says, I'm going to fail. Another says, they will laugh at me. Another whispers, I'm not enough. If you reach out and grab the leaf, you get pulled into the current. That's what happens when you identify with every anxious thought. But if you simply sit and watch the leaves float by, you remain still, unshaken. The river keeps flowing, but you are no longer drowning in it. Observation gives you the seat, on the riverbank instead of the panic in the water. Observation also transforms the body's reaction. Normally, when anxiety arises, the body responds, the heartbeat quickens, the breath shortens, the muscles tighten. If you are unaware, you get swept away by these sensations, convinced something terrible is happening. But when you observe, you begin to notice, my heart is beating faster, my chest feels tight, my palms are sweaty, and suddenly, instead of drowning in the sensations, you are simply witnessing them. You realize they are not dangerous, just energy moving through the body. This realization can reduce anxiety within moments. There is a story about a monk who was asked how he deals with fear. He smiled and said, "When fear comes, I invite it to tea." That is the power of observation. Instead of running, resisting, or fighting, you welcome the anxious thoughts as if they were guests. You sit with them, watch them, and allow them to pass. In doing so, you discover that anxiety cannot harm you without your permission. It only grows when you fight it. Observing it with calm detachment takes away its fuel. Fear thrives on resistance. It starves on awareness. Think also of the way we observe clouds in the sky. No matter how dark or heavy the clouds look, we know they will eventually drift away. We don't panic when we see them, we simply notice them. Thoughts are the same. When an anxious thought arises, you can say to yourself, "This is just a cloud, it will pass." Observation teaches patience. It reminds you that no thought, no matter how strong, lasts forever. By watching instead of clinging, you move beyond the storm into the stillness above the clouds. The true gift of observation is freedom. Once you see that you are not the storm of your thoughts, but the sky that holds them, anxiety loses its grip. You no longer need to silence your mind or fight with it. You simply watch, and in that watching, something extraordinary happens. A calm presence emerges. A presence that is untouched by fear, untouched by doubt. That presence is who you truly are. Observation is not passive. It is the most powerful action you can take, for when you observe, you step into freedom, and freedom is the antidote to anxiety. Anxiety is not just a collection of thoughts, it is energy. You feel it in your body, the racing heartbeat, the tightening chest, the restless hands. Most people experience this surge as something negative, as proof that something is wrong. But what if we saw it differently? What if we understood that this energy is neutral and that we can redirect it? The very fuel that seems to paralyze you can also be the same fuel that propels you forward. The difference lies not in the energy itself, but in how you choose to use it. Consider an athlete before a competition. Their stomach churns, their breath quickens, their heart pounds. These are the same sensations many describe as anxiety. But athletes interpret them as excitement, as readiness. The body is preparing for action. The difference between fear and excitement is perspective. When you label the energy as fear, it feels heavy and overwhelming. When you label it as readiness, it feels empowering. This shift is not imaginary. It is a real redirection of the body's energy from paralysis into performance. Think of electricity. The same current that can electrocute you can also power a light bulb. It is not the electricity itself that determines the outcome, but how it is channeled. Anxiety works in the same way. Left uncontrolled, it shocks you into fear and hesitation. But when you channel it, the same energy lights up your focus, sharpens your senses, and fuels your action. Many people perform their best when slightly nervous. The presentation is sharper, the creativity stronger, the awareness heightened. Anxiety, when redirected, becomes not a weakness but an ally. One way to practice this redirection is through the body. When you feel anxious energy rising, instead of resisting it, give it movement. Go for a walk, stretch, breathe deeply, or even write down your thoughts. By engaging the body, You give the energy a pathway to flow instead of a cage to rattle inside. A racing heartbeat can become the rhythm of a run. Restless hands can become the movement of writing. The mind believes it is drowning, but the body can learn to swim. Redirect the energy through action, and it stops suffocating you. There is also a mental redirection. When your mind screams, something bad is going to happen, you can choose to redirect that energy into preparation instead of panic. Nervous about an interview? Channel that nervousness into research, into practicing answers, into rehearsing. Anxious about a presentation? Use the energy to refine your slides, to rehearse your delivery. Instead of freezing, you are moving. Instead of fighting the energy, you are harnessing it. In this way, anxiety becomes a teacher of discipline, showing you exactly where to focus your effort. Redirection is not denial. It is not pretending that you are calm when you are not. It is the art of taking what is already there, the racing heart, the restless mind, and giving it a purpose. This is why many great performers, speakers, and leaders admit they still feel nervous before stepping on stage. The difference is, they no longer see it as anxiety. They see it as energy. They take that trembling inside and turn it into presence, passion, and connection. And you can do the same. When you stop fighting the energy and start guiding it, you discover that anxiety is not an enemy, it is a source of power waiting to be redirected. The 90% rule is not just an idea to understand once. It is a practice to live every single day. Anxiety doesn't vanish after hearing a speech or reading a book. It reappears in moments, big and small. The question is, when it does, how do you respond? This is where the 90% rule becomes practical. Each day brings opportunities to test it, to embody it, to let it reshape how you experience life. The key is consistency. Freedom from anxiety is not a one-time victory, but a habit of mind built over time. Start with awareness. When an anxious thought arises, what if I fail? What if they judge me? What if this goes wrong? Pause and ask yourself, is this part of the 90% or the 10%? That simple question disrupts the automatic panic. If the thought belongs to the 90% illusion, you can let it drift away like a cloud, knowing it will never materialize. If it belongs to the 10%, you face it directly, not with dread, but with preparation and courage. This daily sorting process prevents you from drowning in the flood of worries. It gives your mind a filter, separating illusion from reality. Living the rule also means practicing micro moments of letting go. Throughout your day, you will feel small spikes of anxiety before sending an email, before making a phone call, before meeting someone new. In those moments, remind yourself, 90% of what I fear isn't real. Breathe, smile, and step forward. These little acts of trust accumulate, building resilience over time. Anxiety thrives on repetition, but so does courage. The more often you practice letting go of the 90%, the more natural it becomes to move through life with ease. Another daily practice is journaling. At the end of the day, write down the things you worried about in the morning. Then look back and ask, how many of these actually happened? This exercise makes the 90% illusion visible. You begin to see on paper how often your fears vanish into nothing. Over time, the evidence builds, and your mind learns to trust reality more than imagination. The page becomes a mirror, showing you how little of your worry belongs to the 10%. This habit grounds the 90% rule in lived experience, turning it from theory into proof. Mindfulness is another path. Set aside a few minutes each day simply to observe your thoughts. Sit quietly, close your eyes, and notice what arises. Watch your anxious thoughts come and go without judgment. Say to yourself, there's a worry, there it goes. This daily observation trains your mind to detach from its stories. Slowly, you realize that your thoughts are like passing traffic, constant, but not permanent. The 90% rule becomes a felt reality, not just a mental concept, because you experience first, and how most thoughts dissolve when left alone. Finally, to live the 90% rule daily is to live with trust. Trust that not everything has to be controlled. Trust that you are strong enough for the 10% that does come. Trust that life unfolds more gently than your fears predict. When you wake up each morning, you can choose to carry the heavy backpack of imagined fears, or you can choose to walk lighter, carrying only what is real. This choice, repeated day after day, transforms how you live. The 90% rule is not just about destroying anxiety, it is about reclaiming your freedom to be present, to act, to live fully without the constant weight of illusions. So here's the truth: anxiety does not disappear when life gets easier, it disappears when you become stronger. The 90% rule is not about perfection, nor about controlling everything around you. It's about trusting that when you've given your best effort, the rest no longer belongs to you. Imagine living each day with that freedom. No longer tied down by what if, no longer haunted by mistakes, no longer chasing the illusion of certainty. Instead, you walk forward knowing, I gave my 90%, and that is enough. Anxiety thrives on control, but peace thrives on trust. Trust in yourself, trust in the process, trust that life unfolds in its own rhythm. The moment you let go of that final 10%, you don't lose control, you finally gain it. So tonight, I leave you with this challenge. In the next anxious moment you face, don't ask yourself, what if I fail? Ask instead, have I given my 90%? If the answer is yes, then breathe deep and let go of the rest. Because the day you embrace the 90% rule is the day anxiety stops ruling you, and you begin ruling yourself.